Here we'll be taking a look at the Geats, or Götar. They are one of the Viking Forefathers, one of the Viking Forefather factions. They originate from the southern parts of Sweden. And for generals options, we have the Nordic Warlord. The Nordic Warlord is a very underwhelming unit, aside from two things. One, he has a whole lot of health, and two, he scares. So he scares everyone while he is immune to fear himself, potentially a very useful trait. However, fear is abundant in the rosters of the Viking Forefathers, so if you want a cheap general, able to pop shield wall, who doesn't have to, who's more of a supporting character in the battle, not someone who rushes in and breaks the main line, then the Nordic Warlord is an okay choice. Then we have the Nordic Raid Leader, and picking this guy for your generals options is risky. He still has scare, he has rapid advance, but this guy is just so vulnerable to missiles and cavalry that I quite like him, because even though he has a very low melee attack, he has 20 bonus against infantry, massive amount of charge and melee damage, so you're basically getting a poor man's huskartel for very cheap. Then we have the Viking Captain, or the Viking Captain. He has decent all-round stats. He's very tanky, great armor and health. He's wielding a one-handed axe. He's throwing, I believe he has a throwing axe as a precursor weapon. Yeah, he does. That has a 15 bonus against infantry. You just need to be a bit careful about the throwing axes, because they tend to find the backs of your own men as well as the enemies. The Viking Captain is very, very expensive. You get a solid unit for the price, but I'm not entirely sure that he's worth. He will rarely be cost effective, let's just say it, put it like that. He is more expensive than several cavalry options, several cavalry generals options. He does have scare, frenzy, shield wall, but he's a very expensive general's choice. In terms of spare infantry, Götarne can bring the Nordic Levy. They can bring the Trifle Skirmishers. They have Nordic Spears, Trifle Skirmishers, Elite Nordic Spears, and Nordic Spear Masters. You basically know what to expect from these cheap Nordic Levy and Nordic Spears. Decent enough abilities to fight cavalry. They won't kill cavalry in seconds. They don't have precursor javelins, but they can be useful. No spear wall for the Nordic Levy. The Nordic Spearmen do have a spear wall. The Trifle Skirmishers are one of the special units of the Geats, but there's just nothing special about them. They are... a Trifle would be something like a serf or a man that wasn't free in Old Norse or Old Scandinavian society. And his stats are not impressive. Not a single redeeming feature, not particularly cheap. Marginally better than the Nordic Levy, but less health. I'm talking about melee attack and defense now, but less armor, less health. It's a bit faster, resistant to fatigue, but I don't see the point in bringing Trifle Skirmishers. Then we have the Nordic Spears, more sturdy than the Trifle. And then we have another unit of... we have the Trifle Spjut, and we have the Trifle Skirmishers. So Thrall Spears and Thrall Spearmen. And once again you get a unit with... precursors, but you get a unit that will die if anything looks at it. So the only thing the Trifle Skirmishers have going for them is that they have a precursor weapon, a precursor javelin, which is useful against cavalry. They also have a resistance to fatigue, which can also be useful if you're using them to run around a lot on the flanks, but they will die massively and horribly to any kind of decent infantry and cavalry. Then we have the elite Nordic spearmen, and these are your first really good spear units. Just all around solid tanky unit. A bit low on the health. I don't quite understand why health values are the way they are in this game, but you get quite a lot of armor, health, morale, just all around solid stats. Frenzy, the ability increases your melee attack by a bit, not a really useful ability. But against cavalry, in my opinion, these guys are going to be your main, your go-to infantry units. And then we have the Nordic Spearmasters, and for a bit extra, for 475 extra, you get a bit more melee attack, you get a bit more charge, you get a substantial amount of armor and health, and the morale remains the same. You also get an inspire effect, which in my opinion isn't... It could be nice. Let's say you have an inspire unit in the center. That's usually where your general is going to be anyway as a Nordic faction. But can be nice to bring Nordic Spearmasters if you know you have to kill a lot of cavalry. We have the Nordic Pikemen. Pikemen for a Nordic faction might seem a bit strange, and it is a bit strange. There are no mentions of pikemen being used specifically in battle in the, for example, in the sagas and in the accounts of battles in the north during this time period. However, there are mentions of Germanic tribes doing so. What there are mentions of is people using what the important thing to understand or to keep in mind about warfare in Scandinavia at this time is that there weren't a whole lot of people in Scandinavia. So if we look at, for example, a Macedonian Pike Phalanx with 256 men, that might be, and then you would have a massive line of those. You would have thousands of phalangites. You have battles in the order of 100,000 men. Now, in Scandinavia, you had much smaller skirmishes, essentially, much smaller battles between smaller groups of people due to there not being a whole lot of people there to fight. So a pike phalanx, a traditional pike phalanx, would be a very cumbersome tool when, let's say, you have a battle with a few hundred people on each side. What you usually would see in the Nordic style of fighting, mainly two things. Ship-to-ship combat, so people would sail up and down the coast, raid, pillage, go to war, but they would fight by interlocking their ships and then fighting for the ships. So essentially pitched battle at sea. Another thing that would happen is that they would create something called a fylking, which is akin to a shield wall, but that formation would be a mixed arms formation. So within the same formation you would have men throwing javelins, not dedicated skirmishers. Each man would probably be equipped with an axe, sword, spear, javelin, if he indeed could afford a sword, but usually he would be equipped with axe, spear, javelin, maybe a short bow. So each man would serve multiple purposes and be in a fylking or a shield wall. And then, or they would be using two-handed axes, and it would be all about breaking the shield wall, getting to the enemy king, killing him, capturing him. You would have the Berserker, who would try to break the enemy shield wall by mad attacks and stuff like that. So the scale of warfare was much smaller than many other places in the world, and terrain also dictated what was possible. So it wouldn't be possible even in many parts of coastal Norway to form massive coherent battle lines. The terrain simply doesn't allow it. So the rant about pikes, the point being that two-handed spears, long two-handed spears were used. However, not in traditional phalanx. Not in a traditional phalanx. What you would see you would maybe see a shield wall in the front ranks using shields, axes, swords, some spears. Second ranks might be using spears to thrust, and there are specific mentions in the historical accounts of how a Viking king should equip his men, and it says that in battle a spear is worth 2 swords because a spear has a longer reach. And you can also see some descriptions of how people in the second ranks would try to poke people in the enemy's first and second ranks by staying behind the shield wall and using spears two-handed. And then we're talking quite long spears, 3-4 meters, although most spears weren't that long. So a weapon that could be described as a pike was used, however not in a traditional phalanx style. And another thing is that repelling cavalry wasn't something that Vikings had to do a lot of, or Viking forefathers had to do a lot of. When they did, it would be something like, but this is later in history, of course. When they did, during the conquest of modern-day France, England, and indeed many other parts of the world where cavalry was used, it was mainly about creating a fylking, or a shield wall, with spears protruding out. There are specific mentions of the Battle of Hastings, for example, where the men in front would kneel down and support their spears towards the ground, aiming for the chest of the horses, charging horses, and the man behind would aim for the rider. So sort of anti-cavalry formation. Anyway, but the main thing with all of the Viking forefathers was that it was far more efficient to move at sea with long ships than it was to move inlands with horses. So that's something that would also have limited the availability of horses, most horses being used as plow animals, there not being a whole lot of huge pastures with which to feed horses and such. So yeah, enough about that. Then we have the Nordic Band, the levy. Oh, well, these are your standard pikemen. They have good AP for some reason, which one base, 10 AP, 11. It's just your standard pikes that can be used to screen an army. Then we have the Nordic Band, and Nordic Band, these guys try to be levy freemen with their one precursor javelin, very cheap price. And I actually quite like these guys as a shield, as a meat shield, both for missiles and cavalry. Just don't expect them to do much. One missile volley might do a lot of damage to enemy cavalry, so they are sort of a guided missile of the day. You can run these guys about, try to get the volley off, and then send in your own cavalry. The Nordic Brigade has 2 precursors. It's still a horrible unit. Then we have the Wolfcoats, and the Wolfcoats share a fate with a lot of the other scout units. They have terrible combat potential. They have interesting abilities in the form of guerrilla deployment, resistance to fatigue, the ability to hide and ignore terrain, but their combat ability is less than impressive. The first decent melee unit you get is in the form of Hirdmadr, or Hirdman, or Herdman. Decent amount of melee attack, melee damage, okay-ish charge, melee defense, armor, health. However, the main thing about these guys is that they cause fear. They are immune to fear themselves, and they can use a shield wall. And a line of Hirdmother using a shield wall can hold for a surprising amount of time and do a lot of damage. One step up, we have the Nordic Warriors, and these guys have a good charge bonus. They have good melee attack. They are very solid units. Immune to fear, precursors, shield wall. They scare. So the magic, some of the magic in the Forefather factions lies in the ability to inflict a lot of casualties on the charge, together with a fair effect to break a main line. So the Nordic Warriors, very good melee unit. Not quite as good as Sarmatian Warband, Gothic Warband in terms of just pure killing power, but still a good unit. Elite Nordic Warriors are a step up from the Nordic Warriors. They are heavy instead of medium. They are better in every single way. And they also have Frenzy. Frenzy, in my opinion, a pretty useless ability. When they're exhausted, they can use Frenzy to increase their melee attack by a bit, but it's not really, it's not a substantial enough ability to warrant its use. Then we have the Chosen Warriors, and these guys are way too expensive and way too crappy to be of much use. Now they do have okay stats. However, their 40 melee damage is and 38 charge is outclassed by a lot of other enemy troops in the same price range. So Chosen Warriors, in my opinion, are useless. You get far more for your gold when you buy Nordic Warriors or Elite Nordics. For axes, we have Nordic Axe Warriors, low health, awesome charge bonus, melee damage, melee attack, and a bonus against infantry. One of these guys in a main line can absolutely slaughter enemy infantry as long as you manage to keep him away from missiles and cavalry. One missile volley from the right unit can bring this unit down to about half strength because of the lack of shields and armor. Nordic Axe Warband, useless. They are cool in the sense that, yeah, the Vikings used axes and the Scandinavians used axes a lot, but in terms of combat performance, these men are underperforming compared to their price. Massively underperforming, actually. Same can be said for the Viking Raiders. Their stats look so nice in terms of melee attack and armor penetration, but they also throw an axe. Thing is, though, with 25 armor, they are and 99 health, they are not tanky enough to deliver the damage they need to do. The Berserker are useless units. There seems to be something wrong with the price here, because in terms of, if you compare the straight up killing performance of the Berserker and the Nordic Axe Warriors, the Nordic Axe Warriors will kill more on the charge. The charge bonus of these Berserker is nice, but the Nordic Axe Warriors have a bonus against infantry, which these Norse Berserkers or Berserker completely lack. So I have tested this extensively, and the Norse Berserker, they rarely go berserk, and they have a real problem killing anything. They can do a lot of damage on the charge, but then they just disappear due to lacking armor and health. So this is a unit that, in my opinion, should get looked at. It is very, very underwhelming. Cheap bows can be useful for pouring down the whistling shot and flaming shot, and the cool thing is with having one archer is that one archer can lay down flaming shot and whistling shot on the enemy, reduce the enemy stats. Then you can stop firing when your guys charge in. The enemy is going to have reduction to melee attack and morale, and minus 12 morale. That is massive. If you if you stack this together with Flaming Shot and Whistling Shot, I made a video about this, stacking fear effects, where if you stack both of these effects together with a -3 fear effect, now you are looking at a main line of enemy infantry that is at -24 morale. That is a line that's going to be breaking fairly easily if they start losing combat as well. If they lose significantly, that's -9. So you have, when these guys charge in, an enemy main line is going to be at -33 morale. Very useful. Slingers, not much to say about them. They don't have precision shot, these Nordic hurlers, and that limits their usefulness. They can do a lot of damage rapidly to units like enemy crossbowmen, but for the Nordics at least, Nordic bows are a superior choice, but very underwhelming units. But I do like the Nordic bows better for the ability to use flaming and whistling. The thing about all of these Trifle Skirmishers or Spjutkaster mother is that they all share the same problem. Short range, they do have good damage potential against enemy cavalry, precision, which precision for these units is going to increase base by 50%, but it's going to mean that they do a whole lot more damage to enemy cavalry and infantry. But none of these units, I've yet to find a way to use these units to their potential as cavalry killers. Maybe 1 or 2 could be nice, but then I prefer just bringing 2 or 3 of these Nordic Band. You get 3 volleys of missiles for that, and you can also block charges, something you don't want to do with these guys because they are much more expensive. Now, in terms of melee cavalry, we have Nordic Mounted Raiders. Too expensive to be useful, in my opinion. They have resistance to fatigue, and they are a raider, which isn't really relevant to multiplayer. Nordic Horse Raiders, decent unit but low health, and they throw missiles on the charge, which can be useful. They are only light melee cavalry. Viking Raider cavalry, good against infantry, but cavalry all cavalry is good against infantry. It's just that these guys are good in extended melee, but you don't want to leave them in extended melee because they only have 25 armor and an axe, so not really useful. The Nordic Recourse Lords are a great unit. They are the only heavy cavalry available to the Forefathers, or at least to the Gautar. They have good stats, missile damage. These 2 javelins can do a lot of damage when they charge into enemy cavalry. Or if you run them around the flanks in an engaged unit of enemy cavalry, you can throw the javelins and then charge in. These guys can kill a surprising amount of enemy. They are not Tagmata, of course, but they are sturdy units, and they can kill both cavalry and infantry in convincing fashion. They also have the fear effect, which together with being unbreakable is extremely useful, because being unbreakable, using headhunt, will allow these guys to stay in the fight for 30 seconds longer. So any cavalry fights are already long, but any cavalry fight can be prolonged with the Nordic Warlords by using headhunt, and then you can rush in, support, infantry support, more cavalry, or you can just hold the enemy cavalry while your own infantry kills the enemy infantry. So that is super useful. Unit that is not super useful is the Nordic Raiders. Completely useless unit. I don't understand why these 2 units cost the same. If someone, let's say someone brought 6 Nordic Raiders, or just a mix of Nordic Raiders and Nordic Warlords, he is at a severe disadvantage compared to someone who just brought Nordic Warlords. The Nordic Warlords, the go-to option for cavalry for the Geats or Gautane. Then we have Hounds. Very cheap. Don't expect them to kill anything. But if an enemy doesn't know how to deal with these warhounds, they can be useful. And another thing that they can be useful in is in when they have sent their dogs, you can use the handlers to pull out precursor javelins, which can be very annoying for an enemy. Now let's have a look at the units, how they look on the battlefield. There are some decent looking units on the field for Gautane. And by the way, the name of Gautane, or the Goths, this name has there is an island outside of Sweden in Östersjön called Gotland, or Gautaland, or Gothland, and you probably see where I'm going with this, with the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. The Geats, or Goths, is a word you find quite a lot during this time period. So, let's have a look here. We have the up front, we have the Nordic brigands, and here we have a mix of male and female talent. You see that in quite a few of the levy level Nordic troops. The wolf coats, they look sort of cool, some cool designs on their shields, but not a unit you'll see a lot of use from on the battlefield. Nordic Raiders, decent looking unit, again mix of males and females, but not impressive combat potential from these guys, and they are too expensive to be useful as a throwaway unit. Here we have the Nordic Javelin Man, the Hounds, Nordic, or by the way, the word for hun, or the word for hound in Norwegian is hun. Hun, hound. Hun, hound. Very similar. This guy is jerking his spear, and white stuff starts sprouting out, so that's nice. Then we have the Viking Raiders. Decent enough looking units. It looks like they have started to adopt Christianity already, some of them. The Nordic Axe Warriors, these guys are beasts, but they die very, very easily. So getting them into enemy main line requires some protection, of course. Let's see here, the Hirdman, Hirdmother, cool looking units. Then we have the Trifle Skirmishers, nothing special about them. The Nordic bows, Nordic spears, Nordic levy, Leidgang, Chosen Warriors, great looking unit. I think the Creative Assembly has nailed the look of these elite Nordics, the Chosens, and the Nordic Spearmasters. The combination of helmet, armor, shield is very striking, and one of the better design decisions in the game, in my opinion. Then we have the Viking Captain, again another cool looking unit. An underwhelming looking unit, the Berserker. These guys just look like they have taken they haven't showered for a few days. They look washed out, and they don't look very fierce. Nordic Axe Warband, way too expensive for what they can do. If they were in the 400s, then maybe. Then we have the Nordic Warriors, and the shield designs are ugly as hell. The rest of the unit is okay. Then we have the Nordic Brigade. These are the levy freemen of the Forefathers. Trifle Skirmishers, underwhelming. Trifle Skirmishers, another unit of Troll Spearmen and Troll Spears. Thrallspjut, underwhelming. And now we have the Nordic Horse Lords. Again, a very cool looking unit with the helmets, the armor, the shields. Sticking to these color schemes for the Viking Forefathers, the white and the red, for the sort of elite units. It's pretty decent, I think. But these colors here, the blues, the reds, the yellows, the greens, they don't look very cool at all. But here we have them anyway, the last unit, the Nordic Pikemen. So this is it for the Geats, or Geutane, or Geutar. Fun faction, their special units are totally worthless and completely crap. This is one of those factions in the game that you kind of wonder, why the hell did the Creative Assembly even bother for making a few extra thrall surf units? I don't understand it. They are, compared to the Jutes, the Danes, the Saxons, probably the most underwhelming Forefather faction. Strength and honor.